Have you ever felt a forbidden attraction, a desire that crosses lines you never imagined? What if that desire came from someone you least expected, someone within your own family? Prepare to be captivated by a story of hidden feelings, secret encounters, and a love that dares to defy all boundaries. This is a tale of unexpected passion, where the line between stepson and lover blurs in the darkness of night. I never thought I'd wake up to find my stepson in my husband's place, realizing only then what had happened the night before. Every move, every gesture, it had felt like him, but it wasn't. The shock of that moment left me questioning everything and fearing what might come next. My name is Mark, and for the past 5 years, I have been married to Richard. He was everything I had ever wanted in a partner: caring, funny, intelligent. And he was beautiful in that effortless way that made me feel lucky every day to be with him. Richard also had a son, Ethan. He was 22 when we met, quiet and withdrawn, a typical young man who often kept to himself. I didn't mind the silence. In fact, I respected his space, understanding that blending families wasn't always easy. At first, Ethan and I didn't have much of a relationship. I was just the guy Dad married, and I accepted that. Richard and I had our own dynamic, and Ethan seemed content enough in his own world. We lived in a comfortable house on the outskirts of town, with sprawling woods that seemed to stretch endlessly behind our backyard. Richard and Ethan were my family now, and I did my best to be a good husband, a good stepfather, but Ethan always had a way of watching me. There was a quiet intensity to him that unsettled me sometimes. Not in a dangerous way, but in a way that made me wonder what he was thinking. Whenever I caught him looking at me, he'd quickly avert his gaze, like he was caught doing something he shouldn't have been. I never thought much of it. After all, he was a teenager, probably just figuring out who he was. But then things began to shift one night. Richard went away for a business trip. It was something that had been planned for weeks, but I wasn't really sure when he was leaving. But I had been looking forward to a peaceful weekend at home. I assumed it would be just Ethan and me, a quiet day of video games, movies, and maybe a takeout dinner or two. But the night he left, something felt different. It was as though the air itself had thickened, as if an unspoken tension was hanging between Ethan and me. I didn't think much of it at the time. After all, it was just me and Ethan, right? What could possibly go wrong? The night began innocently enough. We had dinner, talked about school, and watched a movie. Ethan was his usual self, polite but distant. He went to his room fairly early, muttering something about homework, though I noticed he didn't seem particularly invested in it. I finished up the dishes, set the house in order, and decided to go to bed. It was around midnight when I finally crawled into bed, the sheets cool against my skin. I thought of Richard, assuming he was still here, and drifted off to sleep. But I wasn't prepared for what came next. Around 3 a.m., I woke suddenly. It wasn't a loud noise, but more like an unsettling feeling, like someone was watching me. My room was dark, save for the sliver of moonlight creeping through the blinds. My mind was still groggy from sleep, but my senses were on edge. I could hear the faintest of footsteps on the floor, slow and deliberate, like someone was walking carefully through the room. I froze, blinking into the darkness, unsure if I was dreaming or if someone was actually in the room. My heart began to beat a little faster. It must be Richard, but why would he act like this? The footsteps stopped, then to my surprise, I felt the bed shift as if someone had sat down next to me. The presence was heavy, yet the room remained unnervingly still. I opened my eyes, my mind fighting to make sense of the situation, when I felt a warm hand on my arm. My breath caught in my chest, and I stiffened instinctively. "Richard," I whispered, my voice barely audible, but there was no response. I lay there paralyzed, my heart racing. The hand moved down my arm gently, cautiously, as if testing my reaction. I could feel the warmth of it, the tenderness that seemed out of place, and then the softest of lips brushed against my cheek, a kiss. My breath caught in my throat, my mind scrambling to comprehend what was happening. "Mark," a voice whispered, hushed and gentle. It was a voice I had heard 1,000 times before, but it wasn't Richard's, it was Ethan's. I jolted upright, my heart hammering in my chest. My mind raced. trying to make sense of what was happening. There in the dim light, Ethan was sitting beside me, looking at me with wide dark eyes. His expression was serious, almost unreadable, yet there was something about it, something that made my skin crawl. I felt both confused and strangely drawn to him. "Ethan, what the hell are you doing?" I gasped, trying to push away the strange sense of unease that was creeping into my thoughts. But Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he leaned closer, his face inches from mine, his breath warm against my skin, and then without warning, he pressed his lips to mine. The kiss was soft, tentative at first, like he was testing something, some boundary, some limit. My body stiffened, my mind screaming at me to push him away, to stop this madness before it went any further, but my own body, betraying me, responded. I couldn't explain it. I couldn't control it. The kiss deepened, and I felt the heat of it rush through me, flooding my senses. This wasn't real. This couldn't be happening. I finally managed to break away, my heart pounding in my chest. "Ethan," I snapped, my voice sharp with panic. "What the hell is this? Why are you?" But before I could finish my sentence, Ethan stood up from the bed, his expression unreadable. Without a word, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving me sitting there wide-eyed and shaking. I stared at the empty door frame, my mind racing, trying to process what had just occurred. I had no idea how long I sat there, just frozen, the events replaying in my mind over and over again. The kiss, Ethan, why'd he done that? What did it mean? I had always known there was something strange about him, some quiet intensity, but this was beyond anything I could have anticipated. I tried to convince myself it had been a mistake, a weird, twisted mistake. Maybe he had been sleepwalking, or maybe it had been some sort of misunderstanding, some bizarre impulse he hadn't meant to act on. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Ethan wasn't the type to make mistakes like that, and I wasn't the type to ignore them. But this is only the beginning. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it was just a bad dream, a bizarre, twisted nightmare that had somehow seeped into reality. Ethan was just a kid, a confused teenager, surely just acting out in some way. I convinced myself that it was nothing more than that. And when I woke up the next day, I would be able to look at him with the same indifference I always had. But when I opened my eyes that morning, my thoughts were still clouded with the strange events of the night before. I couldn't shake the image of Ethan's face so close to mine, of his lips soft and warm against my own. My body had responded before I could stop it, and that fact made me sick. I went through the motions of the day, making breakfast, getting ready for work, but all the while, I kept glancing at Ethan's door, half expecting him to come into the kitchen and act as though nothing had happened. But he didn't. He didn't come down for breakfast at all. The house felt eerily empty without him. I told myself that he was probably just hiding in his room, embarrassed or ashamed of the night's events. I tried to brush it off, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that kiss. My mind kept replaying the soft pressure of his lips against mine and the warmth of his body so close to mine. I could still feel it. I tried to focus on work, but my thoughts kept drifting back to Ethan. The kiss had shaken me in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't just the kiss, it was everything that came with it. The fact that he had come into my room, the fact that he had kissed me with such intimacy, such purpose. There was no way this was a mistake. It was deliberate, and that realization gnawed at me, a deep sense of unease sinking into my gut. Later that evening, Richard called. He had just finished his work trip and was on his way home. He asked how things had been with Ethan and I told him it had been quiet, too quiet really. I didn't tell him about the events of the night before. I couldn't. I didn't know how to explain it. How could I tell him that his son had kissed me, that he had invaded my space in a way I couldn't understand? But the moment I hung up the phone, I knew something had to change. I couldn't pretend that everything was fine. I had to confront Ethan. I had to understand what was going on. That night, as the house grew dark and quiet, I heard his footsteps again. This time I was ready. I didn't try to ignore it or convince myself it was just my imagination. No, I had to face it. I had to know. The clock read 2:30 a.m. when I heard the faint sound of his footsteps outside my bedroom. They were slow and deliberate, just like the night before. My pulse quickened. This time I didn't try to hide the fear that gripped me. I lay still in bed, my eyes wide open in the darkness. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help myself. I couldn't help but wonder what would happen this time. The door creaked open, and Ethan entered the room, just like before. I couldn't see his face in the dark, but I could feel his presence. The weight of it. He moved to the side of the bed and stood there silent for a moment, just watching me. "Ethan," I whispered, my voice shaking slightly. "What is this? Why are you coming in here?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached out and brushed a lock of hair off my forehead, a motion so gentle it made my breath hitch. His fingers lingered on my skin as though savoring the contact. "Mark," his voice was barely above a whisper, low and almost soothing. "I need you to understand." "Understand what?" I asked, my voice almost trembling now. "What is it you want from me?" He didn't speak for a moment. Instead, he climbed onto the bed, sitting down beside me, his body so close that I could feel the heat radiating off of him. I wanted to pull away, to shove him off, but something in me, a strange primal part, kept me frozen. "Ethan, this isn't you," I said, my voice trembling now. This isn't right." His lips quirked into a faint smile, and he finally spoke. "It's not about right or wrong. It's about what I want." I swallowed hard, my pulse pounding in my ears. "What do you want?" Ethan didn't respond immediately. He leaned in closer, his breath warm against my ear. "I want to owe you, Mark. I want to show you how it feels." The words made my skin crawl, and yet I couldn't stop myself from reacting. The heat of his body was intoxicating, and the closeness of him made my heart race. Even though every fiber of my being screamed at me to push him away, but I just couldn't. And then, without any warning, he kissed me again. This time, it wasn't tentative or soft. It was urgent, demanding. His lips pressed firmly against mine, his body moving closer until I felt his chest against mine. For a moment, I was paralyzed, my mind overwhelmed with confusion, desire, and fear. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to stop it. I froze, my body tense and rigid as though caught in a trance. The kiss, urgent and desperate, left no room for resistance. Ethan's lips were insistent, pulling me deeper into something I had never imagined, something I couldn't control. His chest pressed against mine, and I felt the heat of his body through the thin fabric of my t-shirt. For a brief moment, I lost myself in it, my mind spinning in confusion and raw emotion, battling against the truth of what was happening. But then, just as quickly as he had pressed into me, Ethan pulled away. He sat back on the edge of the bed, his breathing heavy, his face inches from mine, eyes locked onto mine with a strange intensity one had never seen before. The room was thick with tension, so thick that it felt like the air was suffocating me. I swallowed hard, trying to make sense of it. I couldn't. I wanted to scream at him, to demand that he leave, to tell him how wrong this all was, but my body wouldn't cooperate. It felt like a part of me, some darker, buried part, wanted him there, wanted this closeness that scared me more than anything else. I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. "Ethan," I finally whispered, my voice unsteady. "Why are you doing this?" He didn't immediately respond, but I saw the corner of his mouth twitch, like he was holding back a grin. It was almost like he was enjoying the discomfort he had created, watching me struggle with the complexity of it all. It's not about what you understand, Mark," he said, his voice low and calm. "It's about what you feel." I shook my head, my pulse hammering in my chest. "This is wrong. You're my stepson. This is wrong." Ethan's gaze never wavered. He leaned in closer again, his breath warm on my skin as he placed a hand on my arm. The touch was light, almost gentle, but it carried an unsettling weight, as though he was testing the waters, waiting for me to react. "I know what you're feeling," he said softly, as though speaking to me like I was the one who was confused. "It's not wrong. It's just different." My heart raced as he spoke, and, for a moment, I wondered if I had somehow lost my mind. My body ached with conflicting emotions: fear, desire, confusion, guilt. My mind screamed at me to push him away, to do whatever it took to make him leave, to remind him that he was still just a kid, my stepson. But another part of me, Some buried part of me I couldn't control was drawn to him, captivated by the way he moved, the way he spoke, the way he seemed to know exactly what buttons to push to unsettle me. "No," I said, my voice firming up. "This is wrong. Ethan, you need to leave right now." But Ethan didn't move. Instead, he leaned in again, this time brushing his lips against my ear. His voice was low, almost a whisper, sending a shiver down my spine. "I don't think you really want me to leave," he said, his breath hot against my skin. "I think you're just scared of what you want." I flinched, the words cutting through me like a knife. He was right in one sense. There was a fear, but it wasn't fear of him. It was fear of what he was awakening in me, a desire I'd tried to bury for so long, a desire I didn't understand but couldn't deny. "Ethan, please," I whispered, my voice breaking as I finally found the strength to push him away. "You can't do this. This isn't what you want." He pulled back, but his eyes never left mine. They were dark, searching, studying me like I was some puzzle he was trying to solve. "Don't lie to yourself, Mark," he said, his voice surprisingly calm. "I know what you want. You can't hide it anymore." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that I didn't want any part of this, but the truth was I was torn. The emotions swirling inside me were too complicated, too overwhelming. I was a grown man, an adult, and I should have been able to control myself. I should have been able to see through whatever games Ethan was playing, to stand firm in the knowledge that this was wrong, but I couldn't. Ethan stood up from the bed and took a step back, his eyes never leaving me. His expression was unreadable now, like he had just been waiting for me to break. "You can't stop it, Mark," he said softly, almost as a fact. "You can't stop me, not now." My heart pounded in my chest as the reality of the situation hit me. This wasn't just a one-time thing. Ethan wasn't going to walk away, and neither was I. Somehow, somewhere deep inside, I had already crossed a line I couldn't uncross. He turned and walked out of the room without another word, leaving me sitting there in the dark, my mind in a whirl of confusion, fear, and desire. The days that followed were nothing short of a slow burn. Ethan was everywhere. His presence felt like a constant weight pressing on my chest. Every time I saw him, I couldn't stop thinking about the kiss, the touch, the intensity that seemed to radiate from him. It was as though he had claimed a part of me, a part one hadn't even realized existed until he exposed it. I tried to avoid him, tried to keep my distance, but he was always just there, lurking in the corners of my mind, in the spaces where I couldn't escape. Every time I looked at him, I felt the same pulse of awareness, the same tension, and he knew it. One evening after dinner, I sat on the couch trying to focus on the TV, but I couldn't concentrate. The house was quiet, but the silence felt suffocating. Ethan had been unusually distant all evening, not speaking much, not looking at me. But then, after a long stretch of silence, he appeared in the doorway of the living room, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my stomach flip. "Mark," he said, his voice calm but thick with something I couldn't place. "We need to talk." I didn't want to. I didn't want to acknowledge what had happened between us. I wanted to pretend it was a mistake, something I could forget, but Ethan wasn't going to let that happen. He was persistent. He always was. I opened my mouth to say something, but no words came out. My throat felt dry, tight with fear, anticipation, and something else I couldn't name. "Come to my room," he said, his voice low and inviting, and just like that, I found myself standing up, my body moving before my mind could catch up, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what he was going to do next, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't stop this anymore. I had made my choice. It wasn't a conscious decision, at least not in the way I thought choices were supposed to be made. It wasn't the kind of thing you can rationalize or plan for, but when Ethan looked at me like that, when he invited me into his world where the lines between right and wrong, between desire and taboo, were blurred, I couldn't stop myself. I couldn't walk away. I stood up, my legs weak, my heart pounding so loud in my chest that it drowned out all other sounds. I wasn't sure if I was afraid or excited, maybe both, maybe neither. All I knew was that I was no longer in control. Ethan didn't wait for me to say anything. He simply turned, his movements fluid, sure, as if he'd already planned this. He knew exactly how this night would go, and somehow, so did I. He led me down the hallway, his presence so commanding that I felt as though I was being pulled along by invisible strings tethered to him. His footsteps echoed softly on the floor, a rhythm that seemed to match the frantic beat of my heart. When we reached his door, he stopped and turned to face me, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Ethan," I whispered, my voice shaky. I wanted to say more, to ask why, to beg him to stop, but my words felt empty in the face of what was happening. He didn't speak, just reached out and then gently touched my arm, guiding me inside. The room was dim, the soft light of a desk lamp casting shadows on the walls. The air in the room felt different, heavy with anticipation, thick with an electric tension that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I stood there for a moment, frozen, unsure what to do. My mind screamed at me to turn around, to leave, but my body, betraying me, remained rooted in place. Ethan moved behind me, closing the door softly with a click that seemed impossibly loud in the silence of the room. When I turned around to face him, he was standing so close that I could feel the heat of his body, his eyes locked onto mine with that same intensity, as though he could see through me, as though he knew everything about me, every secret desire I had hidden away. "I don't want to fight this anymore," he said, his voice a low, almost soothing whisper. "You don't have to fight it either." I shook my head, trying to push away the confusion that clouded my thoughts. I had always been the rational one, the one who made the sensible decisions, but now, standing in front of Ethan, none of that mattered. It was like I was drowning in his gaze, in the heat between us, in the quiet desperation that hung in the air. "I don't know what you want from me," I murmured, the words barely leaving my mouth. I was ashamed of myself for even saying it, but I couldn't deny the truth that was lurking in the pit of my stomach. "I want everything," Ethan replied simply. "I want all of you. I've always wanted you, Mark." The words were like a punch to the gut. I wanted to tell him that this wasn't possible, that I couldn't, no. I shouldn't let this happen, but as I opened my mouth, Ethan reached out and touched my face, his fingers warm and gentle against my skin. The tenderness of it, the way his touch seemed to erase all my doubts, was almost unbearable. "Please," he whispered, his voice thick with something I couldn't place. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." Before I could stop him, before I could even think, Ethan kissed me. It wasn't tentative or questioning. No, this time again, it was full of purpose, a desperate urgency that consumed us both. His hands roamed over my chest, pulling me closer as if he were trying to merge our bodies into one. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could do was respond to him, as though my body had betrayed me before my mind even had a chance to process what was happening. And when I kissed him back, I realized just how far I'd already fallen. I couldn't stop. For the first time in what felt like forever, the weight of my life, of responsibilities, of relationships, of the rules that governed every decision I made disappeared. There was only Ethan, only him, and the heat of his body against mine, the taste of his lips, the pressure of his hands on my skin. It felt like I was floating, like nothing else existed outside of this moment. I heard myself moan, a sound that shocked me as much as it shocked him. He smiled against my lips, a wicked grin that sent a shiver down my spine. His hands moved lower, brushing against the waistband of my pants, and I gasped, pulling back just enough to look into his eyes. "Ethan," I breathed, my voice trembling. "This was wrong. We can't do this." His expression softened, almost as though he were reassuring me, but there was a predatory gleam in his eyes. "Well, I already have," he said softly, "and now you're mine." Before I could protest again, he kissed me deeply, silencing all the doubts that flooded my mind. His lips were everywhere, on my mouth, my neck, my chest, his hands exploring, pulling at my clothes, as though they were nothing more than barriers to what he wanted. And I let him. I let him tear down the walls I had spent years building. I let him pull me deeper into his world, into the darkness I had tried so hard to avoid. The lines between right and wrong, father and stepson, blurred until they disappeared entirely. There were only the two of us, Only the desperate need to touch, to feel, to lose ourselves in each other. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew this was wrong. I knew it wasn't something I could ever explain, but at that moment, none of that mattered. I couldn't deny it. I didn't want to. Ethan's hands moved skillfully, undoing the buttons of my shirt, his touch sending sparks of heat through my body. I felt exposed, vulnerable, but for some reason, that made me want him more. He seemed to sense this, his lips curling into a smug smile as he pushed me back onto the bed, his body pressing into mine as he hovered above me. "Don't fight it, Mark," he whispered, his voice almost a taunt. I didn't answer. I wasn't sure if I even wanted to. I let out a shuddering breath as Ethan's hands roamed lower, and I realized that I was no longer just a passive participant in this twisted game. I was complicit. I was just as much a part of it as he was, and in that moment, I knew there was no going back. The next morning, I woke to find myself alone in Ethan's bed, the room quiet and still. The events of the previous night seemed like a dream, a fevered hallucination. I could hardly believe it had happened. The shame, the guilt, every part of me screamed that this was wrong, that I should leave, that I should go back to my old life. But something else lingered, something darker, deeper, a hunger that hadn't been satisfied, that wouldn't be satisfied with just one night. I knew it now. Ethan had made me his, and somehow I had let him. I stood up slowly, my body aching from the night before. I didn't look at the bed, at the empty space beside me. I didn't want to see the aftermath of what I had done, but as I walked toward the door, something caught my eye. Ethan's eyes watching me from the doorway. "You won't leave?" he said softly, almost as if he were reading my thoughts. I stopped in my tracks, my breath catching in my throat. You'll come back," Ethan interrupted, his voice sure, unwavering. "We both know you will." And with those words, I realized that he was right. I couldn't leave because no matter how wrong it was, no matter how much it terrified me, I was already in too deep. There was no escape from what we had started, and the game was far from over. If you're moved by Mark and Ethan's story, give this video a like and share with others. Don't forget to subscribe to LGBT Stories for more emotional and captivating tales just like this one. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of this unexpected love story? We love hearing from you. Thanks for watching.